In a small, peaceful town, Ricardo Parida was considered the perfect dentist, beloved by all and successful in his career. His ambitions were limitless, and he was always striving for the best. His wife Carmen had been his partner in life for many years, and they had 2 young daughters. On the surface, their family life was filled with love and stability. However, beneath this calm, waves of anger and psychological pressure were slowly brewing. Despite the outward serenity, problems had begun to sneak into Ricardo's relationship with his wife, who had started to notice changes in his behavior. At first glance, Ricardo and his wife Carmen appeared to be the ideal couple, seemingly deeply in love. After their marriage, they had 2 daughters, and it seemed their family life was heading in the right direction. But in recent years, Ricardo began feeling frustrated. He became more irritable and less attentive to his family. He focused intensely on his work, leaving a growing gap between him and his family. Carmen, who had been trying to keep the family together, began to sense the widening distance between them. But Ricardo avoided discussing his true feelings, choosing silence instead. As time passed, the pressure on Ricardo began to mount. He felt frustration in many aspects of his life-work pressure, tension with his wife, and isolation from his friends. He began to exhibit strange behavior, his temperament changed, and his isolation deepened. He would leave for long periods without telling anyone where he was going, and he always appeared anxious and irritable. Carmen began to sense that something was wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what was happening to his rapidly deteriorating mental state. Over time, their arguments became more frequent, and Ricardo showed clear signs of unwillingness to communicate. On a morning in 1992, Ricardo woke up feeling strange. He sensed something mysterious taking control of him. At that moment, an invisible decision began to form in his mind. A fateful day awaited him, and he knew that what he was about to do would change his life forever. His wife and daughters were at home, while Ricardo prepared himself to commit a horrific crime. The mind that had been exhausted by pressure and stress could no longer control his emotions, and the decision in his mind became resolute. That day, the final chapters of his family's life would be written. The day before the crime, some began to notice the growing tension between Ricardo and his wife. Near-daily arguments were happening at home, while the children tried to avoid the conflict. Friends of the couple observed that Ricardo had become less engaged, less interested in the details of everyday life. Carmen began complaining about the lack of respect and mistreatment, but she still hoped for a change. There were signs that things were heading in a darker direction, but no one expected it would lead to a tragic end. They were all living in denial. In an unexpected turn of events, Ricardo made the decision that would change his life and his family's forever. While Carmen was busy in the kitchen, with the increasing pressure building inside him, he suddenly attacked her. The victim fell to the ground amidst a silent scream of pain, while Ricardo lost all connection with reality. His mind had drowned in a state of hallucination and psychological strain. In those dark moments, he no longer saw the wife he once loved. Instead, he saw someone else, a figure representing all the pressures that had accumulated in his life. After killing her, he felt a strange sense of relief, but at the same time, he knew that what he had done would not go unpunished. But the killing did not stop with Carmen. It extended to his daughters, who had remained in their rooms, unaware of what was happening outside. Ricardo was in a state of mental chaos. Without hesitation, he went to the girls' rooms. As one of them opened her eyes in shock, he pounced on her with brutal force, completely devoid of any thought of mercy. There was no turning back now. He had entered a spiral from which there was no escape. When he finished killing his daughters, He looked around for a moment, and the sudden silence that filled the house instilled in him a fear of the future that would relentlessly chase him. Just as the murder was nearing its end, Ricardo's mother-in-law, Veronica, entered the house, unaware of what was unfolding inside. She had just returned from a visit to a relative. As she passed through the front door, she was shocked by what she saw. The bodies of her daughter and granddaughters were scattered throughout the house. Blood splattered everywhere. She looked at Ricardo, who stood motionless, his face a mix of confusion and threat. There was no escape or chance for survival for her. He rushed at her with the same cruelty, ending her life just as he had with the rest of his family. The final moments of her life marked the beginning of Ricardo's legal pursuit. As the mother-in-law tried to flee from the massacre, she whispered words that were unintelligible, but she realized they might be her last moments. Ricardo, now breathing heavily and driven by an irrational frenzy, approached her. At that moment, there was no escape. The mother-in-law fell victim in the end. It seemed that everything was over, and the Parida family's life had come to an abrupt end, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. Ricardo left nothing behind but death and ruin, and this day would forever be etched in the memory of the town. After committing the horrific crime, Ricardo vanished without a trace, leaving behind utter chaos. Law enforcement was in shock and disbelief, and everyone was gripped with fear and anxiety. The Parida family was no more, and Ricardo became the town's most wanted man. There was no trace of him, as if the earth had swallowed him whole. The town was enveloped in a dark silence, while investigations continued. But there was no progress in discovering his whereabouts. The police launched a city-wide manhunt for Ricardo. Homes and streets were devoid of any trace of him, making the investigation even more difficult. His photo was distributed on local media, and the public was encouraged to contact the authorities with any information regarding his whereabouts. The search efforts intensified, but Ricardo had mysteriously disappeared. As the days passed, rumors started circulating about the intensive searches in surrounding areas. After weeks of intense searching, investigators uncovered critical evidence at Ricardo's home, linking him to the crime. Their inquiries led to the discovery of medical records, suspicious letters, and testimonies from individuals who had been in contact with him before the crime. Evidence began to accumulate, increasing the certainty that Ricardo was the perpetrator. However, his hideout remained a mystery, though they were getting closer to finding him. In a surprising operation, the police were able to locate Ricardo in an abandoned house outside the town. The moment of his arrest was tense, as he was found in a state of delirium and confusion. He was charged with the murders of his wife, daughters, and mother-in-law, and his face was marked with shock rather than any other emotion. He was quietly escorted to the police station, where investigators began their questioning. Ricardo Parida's trial was scheduled, and the courtroom filled with the public and lawyers eager to follow the case that had shaken the town. The evidence against Ricardo was overwhelming, but his defense tried to argue his mental state. The judge faced a heavy burden in making a decision. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, with everyone wondering whether Ricardo would receive a death sentence or life imprisonment. In the end, the court convicted Ricardo Parida of premeditated murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The case, which began with a horrific crime, ended with a judgment that brought justice to his victims. The town finally exhaled with relief, but the dark memories of the crimes Ricardo had committed would linger in the minds of the people forever. Source of the true story. The story is true and took place in 1992, with the case closed in 1994 in Nuevo León, Mexico.